humans ask themselves, at least once in their lifetimes, why was I born? How should I spend my life? In the search for answers to these questions, we look to modern literature or ancient spiritual texts to find out what the great teachers of the past and present have to say. And we visit sacred places where these teachers lived and developed. Just for a while, let yourself forget about all the things on your mind and come with us on a journey to the ancient world of our ancestors, whose lives were so marvellous that they now look like something out of a fairy tale. On this journey, we will visit the sacred places of India and Nepal, where, 2,500 years ago, Prince Siddhartha Gautama lived his extraordinary life. He renounced his wealth and power in the search for the greatest knowledge, and he directed all his energies to his spiritual growth. And then he finally found what he was looking for, the way of delivering humanity from disease, old age, and death. His awakened state of consciousness defined his new name, the Buddha. The Buddha willed his followers to visit 4 places: the place of his birth, Lumbini Park, the place of his enlightenment, the Mahabodhi temple complex at Bodh Gaya, the place of the first turn of the wheel of Dharma or his first sermon, the deer park at Sarnath, and also Kushinagar, the place where the Buddha reached parinirvana. Besides these places, we will visit the ruins of the royal palace in Kapilavastu, Mahakala Cave, which was Prince Siddhartha's place of great austerity, Gritrakuta Mountain, Vaishali Park, and the historical monument Nalanda, the ruins of which were once the largest university of the time, and also Kathmandu, which still has many traces of the great yogis of the past. Yoga techniques have been used for many centuries as a way to get knowledge of the inner personal world, and to find answers to fundamental questions. This is why we will start this journey with the teachers of the Om.ru Yoga Club. We will follow the way of the Buddha and familiarize ourselves with his story. We will try to understand whether the Buddha's teaching can speak to the Russian soul. I heard about Buddhism for the first time from my relatives, when my sister said that she was thinking about changing her religion. To say the least, this news was a massive shock for me, because I had been a Christian for a long time, visiting church, learning prayers, and thinking that, for Russia, Christianity is the religion that has supported our nation for many, many centuries. Then I started to learn information about this person, the Buddha. I had some kind of revelation. All my questions found answers in an understandable, simple way. I can't say that for me it was hard or unacceptable, because I hadn't philosophized a lot before or tried to find the purpose of life. I had some domestic problems I was trying to solve. I had goals and general household matters to attend to, like everyone else. So when I started to learn the main concepts of Buddhism, I was very interested. And the more I learned, the more response I could find somewhere within my inner world. When looking at the Buddha's image, we might draw the hasty conclusion that the personality of this extraordinary human has nothing in common with our country and culture, as he is usually depicted with Indian or Chinese features. However, after a detailed, careful study of the ancient and modern texts about Buddha Shakyamuni, you will see that he is directly related to our nation, and that the cultures of Russia and India have been intertwined since ancient times. I think that the relationship between our culture and the one we see in India is very strong. However, unfortunately, at the present time, a great deal has been done to make nations feel separate and distant from each other, so they do not remember their backgrounds and origins. The similar rites, customs, symbols, amulets and ornaments can remind us about the relationship between our cultures. To this day, the people of India honour the law of our common ancestors, the Aryans, which is stated in the Vedic texts. The word Vedic we can hear in the Russian verb vedat, which means to know. This knowledge, recorded in the most ancient extant texts on our planet, was written in Sanskrit. In the 1960s, a very meaningful event happened. Russia was visited by the eminent Sanskrit expert Durga Prasad Shastri. 2 weeks into his journey, he refused translation services because he started to understand Russian speech. In his report, he wrote that, in his opinion, Russian and Sanskrit were the most similar languages in the world. Once there was a single culture that embraced territories that now form part of Russia, including both Asia and Europe. According to some information, to some research, there was even a worldwide civilization that covered nearly the whole globe. It's hard to accept that, even though the Russian language is still considered as a great language, it was far greater before. Sanskrit is a prototype of Russian. There was a united culture before, and it still remains intact in some places to this day. Now, in Russia, unfortunately, few remnants are left, both in terms of material evidence and knowledge of the sacred teachings. Modern researchers say that the Shakya clan, into which Siddhartha Gautama was born, came from the western territories of what is today called Russia, and formed an independent country in a place between the centre of Varanasi and the foothills of the Himalayas, with its capital in Kapilavastu. The Shakya were the descendants of the legendary kin of King Ikshvaku, and were excellent rulers and fearless warriors, or, to use the Sanskrit term, they were excellent Kshatriyas. It is said in the scriptures that Prince Rama, who is one of Vishnu's avatars on our planet, and the hero of the epic Ramayana, was also born into the Aryan race. According to the Vedas, the Shakya's genetic tree started from the time when the creator, Brahma, originated this world. Ikshvaku was the first king of the dynasty, and also he was the grandson of the sun god, which is why this kin is named the Sun Dynasty. Ancient Aryans thought life to be a divine game, understood that the world is a manifestation of consciousness, lived with a clear conscience in harmony with nature, and saw the divine essence of everything. If we analyse the word Buddha, we discover that it is not a name but an epithet, which means to awaken somebody, or to be awakened. Therefore, Buddha is awakened indeed. And in principle, anyone can become Buddha. It is said in the scriptures that, during the existence of the universe, there have been numerous Buddhas. People often confuse essence and form. If somebody talks to a Russian guy about Buddhism, the first thing that he will imagine will be statues with narrow eyes, some kind of specific style of decoration, such as Tibetan, because Buddhism passed through Tibet. But this guy won't consider the worldview and the teaching of Buddha. However, everybody should study this, despite the colour of their skin, religion, language, or geographical location. There is not any form of compulsion. Nobody makes you wear certain clothes, or shave your hair, or grow a beard, or speak some language. You do not find such things in Buddhism. Buddhism goes very well with anybody, if it is possible to express it like this. Buddha was not a Chinese man who lived in the north of India. He was Aryan, and it was very interesting for me, because when you read, for example, the Jatakas or Sutras, you find that at the end of these texts the following words: "This is the way the Buddha explained the Aryan principles." As for me, I feel real intimacy with Vedic knowledge. But when I started to familiarize myself with Buddhism, I felt a certain sense of caution, because I knew that only your real ancestors wish you well. If you choose strange teachings, it is a big question what result you will have, because there should be a connection, transmission. And, of course, when I found out that all the teachings of Buddha are originally Russian, that it is the knowledge of our ancestors, then I felt an additional respect and understanding. It may be the case that a person who was born in Russia could have been born in Buddha's time, and maybe it is Buddha who will help that person to remember the way he used to follow. You may not believe in cycles of birth and death. Maybe someone will accept information from one teacher, but he won't understand anything from another, even if these teachers give exactly the same information. Maybe the Buddha will be a guide, a light, a discovery that will help a person to realize the path that they need to follow in future. It's possible that some particular teaching of Buddha, some Jataka or parable, some story about Buddha will become intimately comprehensible to a person. Then he will say, "Now I have finally understood." Both in the Vedas and Buddhist scriptures there is one particularly important worldview, which is the belief in reincarnation and the cycle of birth and death. According to this belief, Jivatma, or the individual soul, leaves the physical body after death and finds another one. In the next incarnation, everything will start again from the beginning. Birth, maturation, new trials, old age and death. These cycles are an effective way of nurturing the soul and giving it the necessary life lessons. The existence of reincarnation can be proved by the many stories of different people from diverse countries who have remembered past lives and who have found evidence that these recollections are not fantasies. It is important that the cycle of birth and death changes our attitude to life substantially, and it generally makes it more interesting and meaningful. It's obvious to me that I visited Tibet during my previous lives, and that the teachings of Buddha were very important to me, but I just don't remember it. Why do I draw such a conclusion? Because it opened up for me very easily. As soon as I found something new, I understood that it was always lying on the shelf, but that I was unable to see it. Many people have an idea that India is a country of yogis, where the climate allows people not to work hard and eat fresh fruit the whole year round, and throw their legs over their heads on a daily basis. But this idea is very far from the reality. Most of the country lives below the poverty line, and the majority of children help their parents by doing hard physical work. To many Hindus, our apartment blocks will appear to be luxurious palaces. The realization of this reality makes participants in our journey look at Russia in a new way. When I came here for the first time, I was an office employee. I had a different kind of life, and I had only just started to practice yoga. That was why everything that I saw in India was a real shock for me. And I think it was the first time I encountered Buddhism and saw the traditions and customs. And most of all, I was surprised by life in India, how people live, how they can live. After that trip, I wasn't sure that I would return to India again, but life goes forward on its way, and now I come to India very often. My first trip to India could be called an Indian trip in name only, because it was a trip to Goa, which is a holiday state of India. and it's very different from the places I have visited with Om.ru Club. But despite this fact, the unusual Indian spirit is so strong that this trip to Goa influenced me so much that after I came back to Russia, I decided to try a vegetarian diet. And I did that easily. And after that, new changes started. It was the cool of India. I was flying to a completely different country, but from the airplane window I saw India. The colour of the earth was terracotta, red, and I told myself I will return back for sure. And I returned home in summer and, due to my karma, I got to do the yoga teacher's training course. And the same summer, at the end of August, I bought a one-way ticket to India. It's like a tradition of mine that I buy a one-way ticket initially. Indeed, it was a calling that I had to go there because I became a yoga teacher and I had to find out what remained in India from the past times that we had learned about during the course. To see how modern India looks and to feel ancient culture. To see how people live there. At that time, I had already started practicing yoga. My first association, of course, was that yoga comes from somewhere in India, and I had a wish not to just go see India, but to go there alone. I wanted to plan the trip by myself from the beginning to the end, and to be free from any timetables. At the end of the trip, I realised that I wanted to escape from daily life, and to find some free time for rest. To realise this, I knew I needed to go to India. I read a lot about it, planned an approximate route with places I wanted to visit. Then I bought the tickets and set off. There was a funny situation when I was in Rishikesh, in one of the ashrams. In the evening, they have a tradition of getting together near the Ganga River, holding lights in their hands and singing something on their own. I joined them and went to their ashram the next day. I saw the main man who had led the ceremony the previous night. He passed by me. I then saw a very beautiful statue on the bank of the river, which looked like the statue in the ashram. It was the statue of a very handsome man sitting in Siddhasana pose with a snake around his neck. I didn't know who it was. I went over to the head of the ashram and asked, "Could you please tell me what this statue is?" He looked at me and I thought that his eyes would pop out of their sockets. He said, "What's wrong with you? This is Shiva." "Oh, okay," I replied. At that time I had a very limited understanding of Vedic culture, and even less about Buddha and Buddhism. Different cultures are neighbours in India. Most of the people of this country profess Hinduism, which in Sanskrit is called Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal path or eternal order, which is based on the Vedic texts. According to these texts, Shiva, who is one of the main Vedic gods, left knowledge about yoga to humanity. During our visits to the historical monuments in India and Nepal, we saw pyramidal-type structures that are called stupas. Some of them can amaze travellers with their huge size. The stupas located in the centre of Kathmandu, that is the capital of Nepal, are an impressive example. There are also many temples, monasteries and other monuments of Buddhism and Hinduism. Bright colours, noisy streets and souvenirs scattered everywhere, revered places of pilgrimage, distinctive squares and museums. This is a centre of tourism, and tourists from all over the world visit it with such pleasure. One of the most admired and attended places in Nepal's capital is the Buddhist temple complex Buddhanath, with a stupa of the same name in the centre. It's an architectural structure which symbolizes wisdom, the overcoming of false conceptions about the world and obtaining enlightenment, which means the full development of human potential. If you visit sometime the Caucasus in Russia, you will still be able to see tumuli in the Stavropol and Krasnodar regions. These wonderful structures, which were made by our ancestors, were used to bury notable people, spiritual figures and warriors. Our ancestors made these tumuli, which are very specific in shape. It's very difficult to make such tumuli. What were they made for? I think there is a certain sense in it. Why? When an outstanding figure comes to this planet, a warrior or spiritual leader, or it may be an ascetic who did a lot of good for the society and who had the energy of kindness running through his body, a tumulus for these people could be a certain support for generations to come. In Buddhism, there are other buildings which are called stupas, but these are essentially the same as tumuli. The main difference is that entire bodies were buried in tumuli, as we know from archaeological excavation, but in stupas only ashes were buried. A stupa is a symbol of the enlightened mind. There are many kinds of stupa, and they are considered as some kind of symbol for people who aspire to spiritual development. As a rule, some relics, sacred texts, and other things are placed in stupas during construction. Some rituals are performed. Of course, it's all connected with the energy of the place and with the energy of the things that are inside the stupa. The stupa and the space around it can keep this energy for a long time, and the place where the stupa is actually becomes a place of power. Buddhanath Stupa was built in the 6th century, and it's often mentioned in historical documents. The settlement that was formed around the temple complex lies directly on the route from India to Tibet. Pilgrims often stayed here. And it's believed that in this stupa there are relics of the Buddha Mahakashyapa, who was the predecessor of the Buddha Shakyamuni. Buddha Mahakashyapa was incarnated on earth in forgotten times, when people had a lifespan of 20,000 years. The stupa is a spatial mandala, one of the fundamental symbols of the Buddhist tradition. Every detail of this complex has a symmetrical shape that has a deep symbolic meaning. In the Buddhist tradition, a stupa constructed according to all the rules is a generator of spiritual energy, bringing harmony and peace for all living beings and bringing nature into a state of balance. But the main benefit of a stupa comes to those who visit it consciously. Very often, a fence encircles them, which has prayer drums. For example, such an architectural complex is located on the other side of Kathmandu and is called Swayambhunath. Going clockwise around sacred places is called kora and is one of the most widespread practices in Buddhism. By making such journeys, the practitioner aspires to calm the vibrations of the mind, to dissolve negative emotions, and to acquire spiritual merits. The rotation of prayer drums can help the practitioner to clear himself of defilements in his mind and negative karma through the power of the mantras that are contained in the drums. The whole inner space of the drums is filled with thin paper rolls with sacred texts on them. The whirlwind of subtle energies and the sacred energy of drums cleans the space around them, and also everybody who is nearby from their accumulated blockages and patterns of behavior. The Kathmandu make a special impression on the majority of travellers. The temple complex at Buddhanath is one of the few places in the world where the culture of Tibetan Buddhism is accessible and not limited by anybody. This is the reason why the nearby streets are filled with monasteries and workshops, where the attributes of Buddhist life are made. A grand stupa is like an epicenter of the whirl of spiritual practice. It helps seekers on the way of development. In terms of energy, it's probably the most powerful, as there have been no wars in Nepal. At least no wars in terms of when one country attacks another and destroys everything. Accordingly, during all this time, over thousands of years, this stupa has been located at this place. Spiritual practitioners are always nearby, and they support it with their vital energy. Probably this is the reason why the general atmosphere around the stupa is very powerful. When you go there, what does it mean to say the energy is powerful? It's powerful in its tranquility. You can finally disengage from the endless hustle and bustle that's around and try to look quietly at some problem that you have, or to look into yourself. Continuing on our journey, absorbing the cultures of India and Nepal more deeply, we familiarize ourselves with the story of the Buddha and the reasons for his birth. Before being reborn on earth, Buddha resided in Tushita heaven, or the heaven of joy. Usually, beings who are reborn in this divine world still have some sensual feelings peculiar to the human world. But there they comply with the Dharma of the Buddha. In most cases, this term means a code of norms and rules that help to maintain order in the world. For the followers of the Buddha, both humans and gods, this teaching about universal law is one of the supreme values. Once, when giving Dharma to the gathered devas, or divine beings, Buddha heard words that were relayed to him among the sounds of heavenly music. An invisible power asked him to come down to our world in a human guise, to slake the thirst of those seeking wisdom. The main problem of our world today, according to many, is the selfishness that is imposed by society. This ruins everything. It ruins society, the planet. It is, roughly speaking, a spiritual cancer. It's practically impossible to satiate selfishness. Correspondingly, Buddha said diametrically opposed words. If we would like to develop, to evolve on this planet, we have to tell society about certain altruistic things, so our children can at least live here, at least for a while, and accumulate some positive experience. Because the basic medicine for selfishness is altruism. If humans attempt to develop altruism, despite it looking very strange from the point of view of the selfish person, it will be a medicine for them, and probably society will change gradually when altruists appear here. Besides reincarnation, the conceptions of both the Dharma of the Buddha and Vedic culture rest upon one more worldview called the law of karma, or the law of cause and effect. The easiest explanation of this law can be found in the Russian saying, "You must reap what you have sown." Anything a person does, both good and bad, will come back to him in this carnation or in the future. I was about 22 years old when I came across a book where I read about karma. I do remember exactly where I read that book and heard about the karma law, about this cosmic law. I remember that I was on the way to the gym and was just smiling because my whole life showed that these linear laws existed. There are no coincidences. As a rule, everything that happens to us is a consequence of our actions in the past. But these consequences are very delayed and usually occur in our future lives. When a person chooses the path of self-development and starts to make efforts, these consequences come around faster. What does this mean? This means that consequences can happen faster and a person is able to see them, to understand them. Consequences can occur to a person so he is unable to find the cause and effect. The cause exists, but the person maybe won't even think about it. There is an effect, but the person is unable to understand that it is the consequence of his deed. He thinks that somebody just did something to him, and he doesn't understand why it happened. But another person, whose mind works differently, who sees the situation from above, who is able to understand consequences and that they affect what happens to him, he will act differently next time to prevent a repetition of the situation. Being aware of the law of karma and being aware about his important task, the Buddha decided to be born into the Sun Shakya clan. He chose King Suddhodana and his beautiful wife Mahamaya, who had dreamed of having a son for a long time. For 20 years, the Maharaja had dreamed of an heir to whom he would be able to hand over his kingdom, but neither Maya nor her sister Mahaprajapati Gautami, who became the second wife of the king, were able to give an heir to the Shakya clan. But one day, Maya saw a dream that was explained to her by Brahmins as a good omen. And, very soon, the joyful news of Maya's pregnancy spread throughout Kapilavastu. At the appointed time, during a moonlit night, Mahamaya gave birth to an heir, without pain, in the gardens of Lumbini. The boy was named Siddhartha, which means one who has accomplished a goal. According to the texts, every living thing was happy about the birth of the Buddha. Even gods came down from heaven to wash his body and shower him with petals of fragrant flowers. The newborn prince had a sensible mind and also developed physical qualities. He took some steps and told his mother that he had appeared in this world to save it from suffering. This is the mystical description of a great soul's incarnation into our world. Pilgrims still come from all over the world to Lumbini Gardens to honour this place, to feel its energy, and to see the tree beneath which Siddhartha was born. I came to be able to believe in the reality of this person only after I came to the places of Buddha's life. Before that, all these religions felt too distant from me. These great people were just inaccessible ideals. Only after I visited the places of Buddha's life could I understand that yes, everything is actually real. 4 places are considered as fundamental: the place of Buddha's birth, the place of his enlightenment, the place of Buddha's first turning of the wheel of Dharma, his first sermon, and the place where Buddha reached parinirvana. These places have a very important value. The reason for this is that when a Buddha's energy comes to the world changes very much. The place of Buddha's birth is permeated by a special energy. It makes this place different to anywhere else. Buddha roughly said the following: if you have the opportunity in your life to visit these places, you can remove negative karma that could occur in the future. The science of yoga classifies the human subtle body's structure and gives an explanation of such a conception as energy. If a person has a strong energy accumulated during practice, then he will leave a mark in places that he has visited, an imprint of his subtle vital energy. It is the reason why spiritual seekers value places where the imprint of past teachers' presence has remained. Energy spaces are places of power, where a person can plunge more quickly and easily into his inner world. Very often during our daily activities, we are disturbed by distractions of all sorts. But in such places, thanks to the practitioners of the past, we can concentrate on our inner sensations more easily. When we come to this kind of place, the endless flow of thinking disappears. The attraction and thirst for new experiences also disappears. Very often, people who have a lot of responsibilities and everyday concerns share their feelings and tell us that they don't even have time for reading. They have no time just to stop and to chant the mantra Om 108 times. But in places of power, all these daily concerns and problems disappear by themselves. Desires disappear, dissolve. All the inner essence is prepared for spiritual processes to work. The good thing is that if a person is not ready, If deep meditation was inaccessible to him before, a place like Lumbini could show him how this world will look if the mind is calm, what emotions can appear, and how a harmonious person can feel like a real part of the world. Prayer flags make the atmosphere of the park rather special. They are a bright and unusual instrument of Dharma. According to Tibetan tradition, the Buddhist mantras and sacred texts or sutras that are painted on these flags radiate subtle spiritual vibrations. Wind catches it up and circulates it to the space around. Here in Lumbini, there are so many flags that sometimes it seems that everything is covered with a colourful blanket, like Maya Devi herself was wrapping this heaven-sent place in her care and motherly warmth. If we speak about Buddha's mother, Mahamaya, first of all I would like to note that it is an incredible and wonderful honour to be the Buddha's mother. And for me, it is wonderful and hard to imagine what merits could have been obtained in her previous life to have the opportunity to bring a soul like this into our world. When we visit Lumbini, women in particular usually feel an inner response in this place. It is considered that motherly energies are present here, and this helps women to feel their female nature, to feel female qualities such as softness and kindness. Some have feelings that we try very hard to cultivate: compassion, love, and so on. We are not always successful in this because it is hard to understand what it really is. We can love our relatives and feel positive emotions towards them, but when we find ourselves in stressful situations, we forget about all these wonderful feelings and lapse into negative emotions. In places like Lumbini, positive emotions and qualities appear by themselves. Within 7 days of Prince Siddhartha's birth, Queen Mahamaya left for heaven, as with all mothers of the Buddhas. Because of her good karma, she incarnated in Tushita heaven among the gods. It is interesting that the name of the queen is similar to the concept of Mahamaya, the grand illusion of reality, that is the fundamental power in Hinduism that charms and diverts consciousness from seeing its own true nature. This coincidence could be seen to symbolize that, despite Buddha being born out of an illusion, he would find a way to become free of it. I interpret it as some kind of window through which we see the world. The glass can be coloured in different ways. Depending on the colour or obscuration of the glass, you look at the world and see it with the imprint of these colours and obscurations. In my opinion, the cleaning of this glass to a flawless, transparent condition is deliverance from defilement. Or we can liken it to a dusty mirror, when you are unable to see your reflection clearly. Or a warped mirror, not straight. Because in such a mirror, big objects seem small and small objects seem big. Deliverance from defilement is to see things as they really are. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, this condition is called ignorance or avidya, and it is the common reason why we divide everything into mine and another's, or good and bad. This is our common, mundane conception, the fruit of a lack of purity of consciousness. Information that could be the truth could be rejected by us as impossible. In my opinion, defilements are different patterns that are downloaded to our brain. When a person faces a certain situation, before making a decision, he rarely stops, calms, cleans his mind, examines the situation from different points of view, or takes into account the past and forecasts the consequences. A person usually either acts practically in the moment or falls into a stupor, just two variants. A second variant is when a person hasn't been faced with such a happening before and simply does not know how to behave. The first option here is automatism, which is when somebody taught this person once, or when the person saw the same situation before and certain reactions to it. It sticks deeply in his mind when he finds himself in the same situation. He acts automatically and doesn't think, especially about what the effect of his action might be. This is a description of defilements, in my opinion. And when it is said that the Buddha freed himself from defilements, I understand it the following way. Roughly speaking, he erased all standard reactions and, when he got into certain situations, he was able to consider the issue from all sides. Buddha was also able to see and consider past and future, and only after that to say something. A few days after Siddhartha's birth, a man called Osita came to the palace, who was a hermit regarded as highly honourable by King Suddhodana. When Osita saw the newborn, he found 32 signs of a great person on the baby's body and predicted that, in the future, he could possibly be a universal ruler, or Chakravartin, who was able to unite the whole world. But he also said that if Siddhartha was to recognize the impermanence of the surrounding world, he would leave the palace and start a hermit's life to save sentient beings from suffering. In extant texts, it is said that the sage cried because he understood that he would not live to see Siddhartha become the Buddha and hear his teachings. When Suddhodana heard Osita's prediction, he was disturbed. He didn't want his only son to leave the kingdom and break with worldly matters. So he decided to protect Siddhartha from suffering, to prevent him from understanding the concepts of illness, old age, and death. Thus, the young prince was surrounded by beauty and luxury. Even withered flowers were cut from the bushes. There were neither old nor sick people allowed in Kapilavastu. They were evicted from the city. All this was done to prevent the prince's heart from feeling a sense of compassion. The king invited wise men especially to the palace to teach the prince, who mastered science with ease and soon surpassed his teachers. The brave youth knew no equal in military arts. In his son, Suddhodana saw inquisitiveness and an aspiration for knowledge, and he decided to find him a wife to strengthen his qualities as a householder. He chose a daughter of King Dandapani, the beautiful and virtuous Yasodhara. Her glorious appearance could charm anybody, and the princess had all the necessary qualities to be a future queen of Kapilavastu, and so she became Siddhartha's wife. But neither the luxurious life of a king, nor the beautiful Yasodhara, nor the birth of a son could carry the prince away from his search for the truth. And one day, during a ride with his charioteer Channa, Siddhartha finally encountered illness, old age and death. Into his perfect world, closely protected by King Suddhodana, had penetrated a new comprehension of life's reality. He came to realize that suffering existed in this world. To stay on the path of self-development, a person should have a belief, understanding, and personal experience that suffering does really exist. When it is only a theoretical conception, it's extremely hard to advance in one's practice. It is said in the scriptures that, during Siddhartha's ride with Channa, that the ruler of the Devas, the king of the gods, who is called Indra in the Vedic tradition, came down to the material world and suddenly appeared before the prince's chariot as a decrepit old man. Fear crept into the heart of the brave prince, because he had never seen elderly people before. Then, in the same way, Siddhartha saw a sick man, and then a funeral. Every time Siddhartha asked his charioteer, "Who are these people? Why do they look like this?" But Channa stuck strictly to the instructions of the king and decided not to explain the bitter truth to the prince. Only because of the will of the king of the gods, which instilled Channa with the strength of mind, did he go on to explain to Siddhartha the laws of this world. There is a theory that Indra contributed to the emergence of Buddha, that he had been helping him to become the person he became since before his birth. The Buddha became a person who, from life to life, had the same status, the same energy, the same worldview. But when the Jivatma of Buddha or Deva incarnates in the human world, when it becomes flesh, it's really painful. And this pain is so strong that consciousness tries to protect itself, so the person doesn't remember. This is why, when all the avatars of Krishna or Rama who were born on this planet in the material body, none of them remembered themselves. They needed some time to realize their statuses. This is the reason why Indra helped the Buddha. It was necessary. Why? Because Buddha reconditioned society. If any society seeks only for material gain, then it will ruin itself. The opposite is impossible. Some spiritual beings are essential to have in this world. Thus, when Buddha was 29 years old, he understood that old age and death were unavoidable, that beauty and high feelings were impermanent, that everything in this world was subordinate to the law of decay. It was surprising to Siddhartha that the people around him accepted that without trying to rectify it. Siddhartha made a decision to help others on the way of deliverance from suffering. Therefore, he developed the qualities of the Bodhisattva, seeking to awaken the essence of becoming Buddha. Buddha was indeed a prince and a very wealthy person. To compare him with nowadays, he had everything. He could be likened to the golden youth. But he understood that everything around him was transitory. He saw that people became older, that they fell ill, that nothing was eternal, and that everything that exists in this material world would turn into dust with time. Everything starts from dust and returns to that state, both people and objects. He also understood that nothing could avoid its destiny, thus he began to look for something eternal. I observed the lives of people around me and understood that there is no definite sense in this existence. Sometimes I even felt that I envied the people who lived during the war, because they had an opportunity to do something great, to sacrifice themselves for somebody or to make some heroic deeds. And I lived an ordinary life and had a feeling that I was just wasting my time. The realization of his future and the future of his family brought Siddhartha to the turning point in his life. He decided to leave Kapilavastu and find a way of deliverance from illness, old age and death. So in the dead of night, Siddhartha stepped through the palace gates, said goodbye mentally to his former life, and moved forward resolutely. But his way was blocked by Mara, the ruler of the sixth heaven. This divine being has enormous supernatural abilities. Mara receives power over other beings by granting their wishes. This is why Mara is usually seen as a demon, not a god. Nevertheless, his role is necessary because obstacles are obligatory trials on the way of deliverance from the cycle of reincarnation. There, near the fortifications of the Shakya capital, Mara promised to give Siddhartha an empire in exchange for his refusal to live a hermit's life. But Siddhartha was adamant. He understood the motives of his tempter, mounted his trusty steed Kantaka, and, together with his friend Channa, left Kapilavastu. His loving wife and his newly born son Rahula remained alone in the silence of their regal chamber. We can love somebody very much, but this doesn't give us a right to bind him. Yasodhara understood, like any wise woman, that this man was able to achieve anything that he wanted, and that he would be able to bring knowledge that would benefit not only her, but also her family and precious child, and the entire world. Family relations and self-improvement is not an easy topic. When a person chooses the path of self-development, he has to deal with his attachment somehow. When Buddha left the palace, when he left his family, he did it because of compassion, because he was really worried about what would happen to his wife and to his newly born son. Nowadays, it's considered that love and care are when you stay in close proximity, participate directly in the process of upbringing, buy expensive gifts, or show you care in some other way. But in this situation, I consider Buddha's deed as the greatest gesture of compassion that he could ever make, because he did for his family far more than any husband or man who is physically around, who earns money to provide his wife and children with everything they need. Buddha opened up the law, which helped his wife, his son, and many other living beings to liberation from reincarnation. I think that to understand this, we have to look at it from a wider perspective. We often think that love is something that has a concrete expression to a certain person or being. This means that I am able to love these people, but I am unable to love others. Because why should I love them, ultimately? And sometimes it's really hard to understand how it's possible to feel equally good feelings to every living being. Sometimes, equanimity in a worldly meaning means indifference. But, if we talk about the correct meaning of this word, we remember the Russian phrase that I treat everybody with equal soul. It's important to understand the Buddha's renunciation in the context of the era and in terms of his status in society. When he swapped the rich silk of the crown prince for the simple cloth of a hermit, he didn't leave his wife and son to the mercy of fate. He knew that the rich Shakya clan would always surround them with care. After Yasodhara found out that her husband had started to live as a hermit, she made the decision not to wear expensive clothes, slept on a hard bed, and ate only once a day. Some princes sought her hand in marriage, but she was faithful to Siddhartha, and, despite the entreaties of her royal family, she tried to lead the same type of life that her husband had chosen. It's hard to compare ourselves with the Buddha, who was able to give up everything, even when he had tremendous wealth, a beautiful wife, wonderful parents. He lived in a palace. He didn't know about hunger or about the necessity of earning money. But, despite everything, despite the possession of all these things, his decision to leave all this, to find a way for deliverance from suffering, is a heroic act. For me, it's something completely impossible, some kind of magic, that a person could leave everything and start to search for the truth, for freedom from suffering to help others, who did it not for himself. That is worth a lot, to give up everything to help others. I think that this is actually something for anybody, but to different degrees. Detachment is when a person frees himself from something old to obtain something new. For example, if a person has the time to practice Hatha Yoga, he will need to sacrifice something else to do it. A person is unable to get something new, to take something into his inner world, until he gives up something. This quality can be cultivated by every person, depending on their karma, depending on the strength of their motivation, the detachment will differ. Most likely, we all need detachment at some time in order to look inside ourselves. Because if you live in a familiar environment and run around like a squirrel in a cage, whirling around according to some plan that was devised by somebody else, you will never understand why you exist, and you won't remember your inner filling that you accumulated from life to life. Most people in the modern world can hardly understand what detachment means, what renunciation of material values means, because the concept of constant accumulation of things, experiences and external information dominates in society. Year after year we form more and more desires, and at the same time we pile up more fear of loss, dissatisfaction, jealousy and sorrow. All these negative feelings come from fear. To get rid of them, we have to strive for detachment. In my opinion, this is the main defilement that prevents people from developing. It is the belief that we can be happy through external achievements. People think the word happiness means constant enjoyment. A thirst for enjoyment, the pursuit of delight, is the aim of many people. In fact, probably 95% of the Earth's population seek happiness through satisfaction of their wishes. One of Buddha's teachings says that there is nothing constant in this world. If we aim for happiness, for external happiness, if we become happy for some period, that period will end sooner or later. And then we will have to again set some goal, to go somewhere, to attain something, thereby wasting our lives. Our lives will end sooner or later. But we just lose our time in the rush for external happiness. We miss the very time during which we could really have results, because it's believed that we are able to achieve enlightenment during our human lives. We can understand that all these external conceptions are delusions and are a veil over our inner state, our enlightened state of love and compassion, that is able to give us, our family, and friends, infinite happiness and peace. A man usually surrounds himself with an excessive quantity of things. A person must have shoes because it's not very pleasant to go barefoot when there is snow. But this doesn't mean that a person should have 10 pairs of shoes, 20 pairs of trousers, an enormous quantity of coats. People usually do this in pursuit of fashion. They don't have a necessity, there are only wishes and passion. But everything we do spends our energy to some degree. According to yoga and Vedic teachings, we must support everything that we have with our energy, which means that the more things we have, the less energy will be left for everything else. Buddha had only a few things: clothes and a bowl. He didn't need anything else. It was enough for him and for what he was doing. Somebody with another occupation in life will need a different set of things. But this should also be based on the tasks that the person performs, not only on their desires. I think that any woman knows what it means to throw out old things. You can feel a sense of relief, undoubtedly. This feeling of lightness that comes when there are only necessary things is very important to move forwards. Speaking of fashion, it's very sad when people effectively make different coloured candies out of themselves. They don't pay attention to the fact that they are inside this candy. They constantly put on new wrappers. It's very sad to see that the person sees himself only as an external manifestation. It's often said that this is a good way to express yourself, that fashion is a way of self-expression. But for me, it seems rather strange, because a person doesn't express anything of his inner or external qualities per se. he expresses only something that is imposed by fashion magazines, fashion bloggers, and so on. It's better to look deeper into the essence of the person, not the image they want to portray. The same approach should be taken when choosing a partner for life, as well as friends. I can say that I used to be a woman of that type. When I attended yoga classes, I thought about the way I looked. I never took off my makeup before yoga class. My eyes were made up, rouge on my cheeks. I thought that this was important because people would see me. White trousers, some beautifully ironed t-shirts. Everything was normal, everything was good. But after a trip to India, something happened. I wanted to look inside myself and understand who I really was. I thought that all these extraneous things were just impeding my progress. After my Indian trip, for example, I decided to refuse makeup completely. My skin thanked me greatly. Many problems with my skin left after my refusal of rouge and mascara. But when I came to work without makeup for the first time, it was terribly stressful for me. But now I know that it's not important. People say that if you work in an office and have a responsible position, or if you have negotiations, that it's inconceivable you should be without makeup, or wear shoes without heels, or a cheaper suit. According to my experience, I can say with confidence that it absolutely doesn't matter, not for negotiations, or responsible positions, or anything else. The most important thing is what you have inside. People can feel it, and even if they buy into some external cover at first, they will get to the core sooner or later. So it really isn't important. There is a divine way of self-development, and there is a demonic way. The demonic way is imposed by modern society. What way is this? It's the way of consumption, unrestrained consumption. Unbridled consumption of resources leads to a catastrophic condition for our planet. Many species of animals going extinct, and the pollution of the environment leads to the emergence of literal islands of rubbish. And this rubbish spreads across the ocean. The wheel of samsara is a schematic representation of the cycle of forced birth and death in conditioned worlds. Within it are the fundamental concepts of Buddhism. The three poisons of ignorance, desire and hate are presented in the forms of a pig, a rooster and a snake, who are located in the very centre of this wheel. These factors keep us away from the spiritual path and from obtaining wisdom. It's no coincidence that the word poison was chosen. Like a deadly drink, ignorance, desire and hate deprive us of a pious life and ultimately bring us to incarnation in lower worlds. Between the spokes of the wheel there are 6 realms. The realm of hell, the realm of hungry spirits, the animal realm, the human realm, the realm of asuras, and the realm of devas. The wheel is held in the claws of Yama, the god of death. According to other sources, this scary being is actually Mara. Only the Buddha stands outside the wheel of birth and death, his example for everybody, showing the way to escape. This picture clearly illustrates the ways for the development or degradation of a soul, and also variants of the penalties for bad actions. Usually, it's the insatiable souls who grab everything and don't see anything else around them who incarnate in the realm of hungry spirits. They won't have anything here. At best, they will get a human body again, and they will get it not from somebody above us, but as a result of their actions. They will be very needy people. We can see examples of this quite often. In poor countries, people don't just live below the poverty line, but on the very edge of survival. From the sutras, we know that such a needy person's life is a consequence of his previous lives, when he lived for himself and grabbed everything he could. And now he needs to learn the lessons of this behavior. It may sound superior from our side, but we hope that we have already learned these lessons. It's easy to refuse something when you don't have anything, but when you have a lot and you understand that everything you have will stay here and that you're unable to take it with you, you start to cultivate some other qualities that you will be able to take with you. All the material things you have, palaces and so on, are better to use as instruments, as means to an end. It's better not to define material goods as the goal of your life, but to use them as means. Because we live in the material world, we have physical bodies, and, whether we want it or not, it's our current situation. We have to use the opportunities of this world as much as possible, including material resources. I formulated the idea for myself, and then I discovered that somebody else had already put it into their own words. Detachment isn't when you don't possess anything, it's when nothing possesses you. We now live in a time when there is a lot of false information. People usually live incorrectly, not because they want to, or because they are unable to change it. Usually they simply don't know how to live correctly. There is a lot of wrong information around us, and people end up with something they weren't really seeking. Siddhartha cutting his long hair was a sign of renunciation of his past, and he then went in search of teachers who would be able to give him the answers to his questions. And every time he acquired new knowledge, he came nearer to the truth, but was ultimately unable to grasp it. He mastered all the practices he was given by his different teachers very quickly, and when he mastered these practices, he continued on his search, and, step by step, his path brought him closer and closer to an understanding of austerity and the necessity of the practice of patience. In yoga, there is the concept of austerity. Among Slavic people, the word ascesis, and the practice of ascesis is fundamental, because work on earth is indeed a great ascesis. And it is a very interesting practice. When your mind and body are busy with something, you have an opportunity for meditation. Not far from Bodh Gaya there is Mahakala cave. It is said that here the Buddha subjected his body to severe ascesis for 6 years. He decided that sensual feelings and memories of the pleasures of his royal life were obstacles to cleaning out his mind. For this reason, Siddhartha refused all but the absolute minimum of food and meditated constantly. He almost died there, and would have but for his good karma, manifested as the Sujata girl, as Varuna. According to the scriptures, Buddha was so weak that, when he went down to the river to drink some water, he fell into the water and was carried along by the stream. A divine being literally pushed him out of the water, exactly where the Sujata girl was walking. Now this name is very popular in the East, and you can find the Hotel Sujata in India. Sujata is now essentially a common noun. It is the embodiment of unconditional help. This girl fed Buddha because she saw a dying human. The only statue you will see in that place is a statue of the Buddha portrayed as a skeleton. But the Buddha was actually a phenomenal athlete. His physical body was huge, and he was very broad-shouldered and incredibly tall, and, according to the scriptures, none of his followers reached even his shoulders with their heads. So the Buddha towered above his followers. He had a colossal body, but, despite this fact, he brought himself to a terrible condition through ascesis. It was a specific place where people came to mortify their flesh. Please understand that there is a good ascesis, and there is also a bad ascesis. Buddha tried to study it, and he understood that it wouldn't lead to anything good. He then renounced the practice. Siddhartha understood from his own experience that neither an exhausted body nor a body lazy from idle pleasures could support clarity of consciousness. Despite these conclusions he made after a long and exhausting practice, it would be incorrect to say that these trials were in vain. According to yoga, ascesis or tapasa is needed to burn the negative karma of the past. This step on the Buddha's path has much to teach the modern inhabitants of our planet. Patience is a unique quality indeed, and I immediately recall a phrase of Shantideva, that there is no asceticism beyond that of patience. I try to cultivate this quality during my asana practice, when it is hard to bear a particular pose, to endure some discomfort for some time. After this kind of practice, I feel that my state changes. Usually it's when my emotional state is not easy, close to depression, or when I have a lack of motivation to practice or to study. For example, when there are not enough results, because we usually want to have a quick result all at once. We do something, and we want everything to change without delay, or at least have some proof that it works. But it's not often that the results appear at once, and we can have a feeling of discouragement. Very often it's like this, that if the energy around is not very good, and you start doing something, many obstacles will appear. This can happen with anything, be it the organisation of a tour or some event, or negotiations with people. Often it can be getting rejected, or anything really. However, if you want to work with the energy, read a mantra or something else that's not very easy to perform, then the situation changes, and the person with whom you were unable to negotiate with before will call you back, and everything will then succeed. Or a tour is cancelled because not enough people turn up, but then the energy changes by the use of ascesis, and the group arrives and the tour takes place. This is a common example. Also, I would like to illustrate one more example that concerns our relationships with our family, which are very important for us. There was a period when my relations with my parents were uneasy because they didn't understand the course of life that I had chosen for myself. Nevertheless, I had to remain with my yoga practice and lead yoga classes, despite my relatives disapproving of my choice. After a year had passed, the situation changed. Now my relatives not only support me, but have also chosen the way of self-development, and I hope that they receive results also. I hope that ascesis and patience have brought this about somehow. You could say that I was looking for ascesis since childhood. It wasn't consciously, but I always loved to restrict myself somehow. I kept fasts, I made vows. I constantly felt that this was developing me and cleansing me inwardly. My dad said that the best form of rest is the changing of action. And maybe I didn't initially link my thirst for asceticism with spiritual development. I just considered it as something that went without saying. I can honestly say that, before yoga, I was a very lazy person. I started many things at the same time. Self-discipline is a good kind of ascesis for me. Ascesis is voluntary self-deprivation of some pleasure, of something that you really like in order to overcome laziness. For me, the main ascesis is overcoming of laziness. It is when you really don't want to do something, but you do it anyway, and then you feel yourself, if not a hero, then certainly freer. Everybody has a different type of ascesis. It's not necessary to stand on coals. Ascesis is part of one's everyday duties. It's a kind of attitude with which we have to perform them. If a person doesn't do this periodically, if he doesn't periodically overcome himself, he will simply forget how to do it. He will simply forget how to develop. Despite his awareness, his wide reading, his experience of practice, a person who doesn't do it systematically will simply forget it. And the other things that hold a person in this world, like pleasures, desires, and habits, will attract him again, and his development will end. In my opinion, ascesis is an instrument for the constant maintenance of yourself at a certain level of development. both physical and spiritual. It's a pledge of future constant development. When you bear something and you get to your limit, and then you still bear a little more, then something new will definitely flow into you. This can be new knowledge, or a new notion or vision or wisdom. Asceticism is an inseparable part of development. The opposite of patience and asceticism are the things spread throughout society: pleasure, entertainment. According to my experience, the quantities of pleasure and delight are equal to the quantities of suffering and ascesis that a person will have to bear, whether he wants it or not. If a person chooses the way of development, he won't have any serious results without the help of ascesis and patience. He won't overcome all his passion, all the delights that he has experienced. In yoga, it's often said that only with persistent effort will you be able to reach something beneficial. Are there any written sources that remain from ancient times where it is said that a person ate deliciously, slept well and suddenly became a spiritual person and did something good for society? If there are, I haven't seen them. All those who lead a dissipated life, they degrade. In their wake, they leave only junk and the things that they spoiled. It seems that the consumer being is physically unable to leave something creative. It turns out that, without certain self-restrictions, it's practically impossible to develop. It would probably be very easy to live like everybody else, to have fun, and to still evolve at the end, wouldn't it? But this is impossible. There are no examples of it. In the life of Buddha Shakyamuni, there were important periods for many years when he searched for teachers who would be able to teach him. Many of these teachers became his followers in the end. This means that when Buddha had gathered all the knowledge that he was able to find, and also realized certain universal truths, those teachers who had given him their knowledge actually became his students themselves. In the second part of the film, we will continue our journey to the places that Buddha willed his followers to visit. We will also tell you about the complications the prince had to overcome before he attained his state of enlightenment and became a teacher to both gods and men, before he became the honourable one. Please do join us if you can.